unlived life within us. Between the two stands resistance. Resistance is the most toxic force on the planet. It's the root of more unhappiness and poverty, disease, and dysfunction. To yield to resistance deforms our spirit. It stunts us and makes us less than we are and were born to be. That's an excerpt from Steven Pressfield's The War of Art. And welcome to episode 1 of the Goodreads podcast, where we are looking at great books to help encourage us and shape us for a better life. My name's Chet. I'm the host. I love to read, and I love to share books that are helping me, books that are influential in my life, and books that have given me a lot to think about and a lot to change. And today we are going to look at one of my all-time favorite books. It's called The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. Now, you may not recognize that name initially, but you probably know who Steven Pressfield is. If you've ever seen the movie The Legend of Bagger Vance, he wrote that novel that the movie's based off of. If you've ever seen the movie 300, he wrote a book called Gates of Fire, which 300 is loosely based off. But here's the sad thing. 300, the movie is not near as good as Gates of Fire, so don't judge Gates of Fire by that by that movie. The book is so incredibly good. So he got famous through writing fiction, but we are going to look today at one of his nonfiction books, and he's written a lot of nonfiction books, and this is called The War of Art. And in it, he talks about how our greatest enemy as human beings is this thing he calls resistance. In the beginning of the book, he said, here's resistance greatest hits. The pursuit of any calling in writing, painting, music, film, dance, or any creative art, however marginal or unconventional. Secondly, the launching of any entrepreneurial venture or enterprise for profit or otherwise. 3, any diet or health regimen. 4, any spiritual program of advancement. 5, any activity whose aim is tighter abdominals. 6, any program designed to overcome an unwholesome habit or addiction. And he goes on to list many more, but the idea is all those good endeavors are stopped by resistance. And resistance is this internal, invisible force within every one of us. And so the war of art, or the war of creativity, or the war of human progress is our own personal battle with resistance. And so then he spends time defining what resistance is. He says it's invisible. It cannot be seen, touched, heard, or smelled, but it can be felt. We experience it as an energy field radiating from a working potential. It's a repelling force. It's negative. Its aim is to shove us away, prevent us from doing our work. So it's why it's always so difficult for us to stick to a diet, to go to church, to have some kind of spiritual growth practice of prayer or Bible reading, all these kinds of things. He says resistance is insidious. It will tell you anything to keep you from doing your work. It will perjure, fabricate, falsify, seduce, bully, cajole. Resistance is protean. It will assume any form if that's what it takes to deceive you. So what he's saying is that the resistance within us, and this is all in us, this is not external. He said this power will do anything it can to convince us not to take the healthy steps forward. There's a proverb that says the lazy man tells himself that if he wakes up and goes outside, there will be a lion to meet him in the streets to kill him. And the point of that proverb is the author is saying that we will make up some crazy excuses to get out and to justify not doing the things that are good for our life. And that's what Steven Pressfield calls resistance. I love this part. This has been one of the most helpful parts of the book to me that I come to again and again and again. He says resistance is infallible. And listen closely to these words. Like a magnetized needle floating on a surface of oil, resistance will unfailingly point to true north, meaning that calling or action it most wants to stop us from doing. But then he says this, we can use this. We can use it as a compass. we can navigate by resistance, letting it guide us to that calling or action that we must follow before all others. And here it is. Make sure you're listening to this. Rule of thumb. The more important a call or action is to our soul's evolution, the more resistance we will face toward pursuing it. Let me read it one more time. The more important a call or action is to our soul's evolution, the more resistance we will feel toward pursuing it. So in other words, the thing you most should do and need to do, you will feel the most resistance toward. So in my life, I've seen this play out many, many different ways. One way that sticks out to me is some years ago, I was trying to get in shape, which I'm always kind of trying to do that. But I wanted to wake up in the mornings and go to jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I love it. It's one of my favorite hobbies, and it's a great way to stay in shape. But I found myself, as much as I would tell myself, man, you love doing this. It's good for you. Your attitude's better. You're better at home. You're better connected to God. It has all these obvious positive benefits. I found that I just did not want to do it, even though everything in me wanted to and knew it was good. And then when I read this chapter, I realized that it is one of the most important habits for me to be really healthy. And that might sound like a strange one, and I can't fully explain why it is, only I know that it is. But the resistance towards it was great. But then when I read this, it made me realize, well, that feeling of great resistance, if you see it as a true north, then that can actually be motivating. And that's how I began to look at it and help me out quite a bit. And so today I would challenge you to think, what is that thing that you know is good that you need to do that you feel so much resistance toward, because that's your true north. Maybe there's someone in your life you need to reach out to and apologize, or you need to reconcile a relationship. But the thought of it makes everything in you not want to do it. And that's because it's so incredibly important. And I love his point here. Resistance is infallible. It will always point you to true north. That's one thought that I've taken away from this book and I use all the time. Sometimes in a week I'll think, what's the thing I'm facing the most resistance against? The internal resistance, and that's the thing I most need to do. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Hopefully that's helpful. He also says this, resistance never sleeps. Henry Fonda was still throwing up before each stage performance, even when he was 75. In other words, fear doesn't go away. The warrior and the artist live by the same code of necessity, which dictates that the battle must be fought anew every day. Now, what's powerful to me about this is it's easy to look at people in life that are ahead of us and think, well, their journey, it's been easier for them. Oh, they probably don't get nervous anymore. They probably are comfortable. They probably feel like they have it. And I bet the people that we really admire and the performers, the people that have abilities and have reached levels of success that we want, I bet it's just as hard, if not harder today for them to keep doing those things than it was when they were at our level or below. In other words, there's never a moment of ease in our life if we're really going to keep growing. And his point is resistance is always going to be there. It's just, are you going to fight against it every single day? And Stephen Pressfield he was a Marine, and he is very military minded in how he writes and the stories that he tells. So for him, a warrior and an artist they both need that warrior spirit. The artist needs to wake up with that same resolve in his gut as if he's going to battle, and he needs to do it again and again. And so again, this title, The War of Art, is this whole idea. If you're doing something creative with your life, if you're a writer, if you're a preacher, if you are an entrepreneur, any of those creative endeavors, you need that warrior spirit to fight against resistance every day. He says this, resistance plays for keeps. Its goal is not to wound or disable. Resistance aims to kill. Its target is the epicenter of our being, our genius, our soul, the unique and priceless gift we were put on earth to give, and that no one else has but us. Resistance means business. When we fight it, we are in a war to the death. So again, just the importance, and I believe this so much as a Christian, that you have a purpose and a potential from God. But there is a power at work in us that will shortcut that will stop that potential from being fully developed. And what Stephen Pressfield calls resistance, Jesus followers and theologians might call indwelling sin, or our sin nature. Whatever you want to call it, I think it has the same effect, and that is what he's talking about. It targets our epicenter, our genius, our soul, the unique and priceless gift we are put on earth to give. And so that's why this internal battle of resistance is so important, because there is something in you that is so important that the world needs, but there is a power in you that is going to try to stop you from living that out. And that's what he calls resistance. He says this: resistance is fueled by fear. It has no strength of its own. Every ounce of juice it possesses comes from us. We feed it with power by our fear of it. Master the fear, and we conquer resistance. And I just want you to think for a second, how many times in life have we limited ourselves by fear? And how many times has that fear been completely irrational? How many times has that fear been really unfounded, but yet it has had a profound effect on limiting what we became and what we did and the choices that he makes? I think this resistance thing is absolutely real. He says resistance only opposes in one direction. It obstructs movement only from a lower sphere to a higher. So only when you're trying to move up do you face resistance. Notice, if you want to make bad decisions in life, there's also tremendous support for that, right? If you want to go and waste your life drinking, doing drugs, if you want to coast at work, if you want to sit and veg and watch Netflix all the time, if you want to neglect your marriage and your kids, that's the easiest thing to do. Notice there's no resistance that direction. There's a lot of support. Life it accommodates that 100%. And have you ever thought about that? Why is that? Well, because in a sense, there's a conspiracy to get us there. And so resistance will never fight you that way, because that's where it wants you to go. But as soon as you decide, hey, this week I'm going back to church, that's when it will get tough. This week, I'm getting back in shape. This week, I'm getting my marriage back on track. This week, I'm going to try to connect with my kids. This week, I'm going to finally take the first step towards that business. That's when you and I face it. And that right there is telling enough about the reality and the power of what he calls resistance. This part was also really helpful to me. He says resistance is most powerful at the finish line. The danger is greatest when the finish line is in sight. At this point, resistance knows we're about to beat it. It hits the panic button. It marshals one last assault, slams us with everything it's got. The professional must be alert for this counterattack. Be wary at the end. Don't open the bag of wind. And so what he's saying in the bag of wind is an Odysseus reference. For those who love the classics, maybe we'll talk about those some other time. But what he's talking about is that sometimes when we are closest to breakthrough, resistance will make one last push to keep us stuck. And so this is important to know, because sometimes when you have made the most progress in your life and when you're about to reach a new level, you will face a strong assault of resistance and difficulty. And I think when you know that is coming, you're more prepared to endure it. Instead of, we are almost to the finish line, we're almost crossing into a new level of growth or maturity or development or whatever, and then we feel this onslaught of resistance. And unfortunately, what can happen if we're not ready for it is we'll quit. And the sad thing is we'll quit right before the breakthrough. So don't quit. Don't quit. Keep going. Maybe you're facing that right now, and I want to encourage you. You're facing so much because you're almost there. keep going. He says resistance recruits allies. Often, couples or close friends, even entire families, will enter into tacit compacts whereby each individual pledges, unconsciously, to remain mired in the same place in which she and all her cronies have become so comfortable. The highest treason a crab can commit is to make a leap for the rim of the bucket. The awakening artist must be ruthless, not only with herself, but with others. Once you make your break, you can't turn around for your buddy who catches his trouser leg on the barbed wire. The best thing you can do for that friend is to get over the wall and keep going. The best and only thing that one artist can do for another is to serve as an example and an inspiration. And so his idea is that many times when you're trying to really make forward progress in your life, people around you might not be excited. They might be threatened by it. That when you start to change in healthy ways, you would think everyone would be happy for you and they would cheerlead and they would celebrate and they would help. But sadly, because we're all broken as human beings, many times it's not that way. And so what happens is that people get threatened by it. They discourage us. They don't want you to lose weight because then they can't live off their excuses the whole time. They don't want you to move forward in their career and get things done because then they're going to have to rethink maybe their own lot and how they've been working and all that sort of thing. So his point is just be aware of that and don't be surprised by it. I love this one. He says, resistance and procrastination. Procrastination is the most common manifestation of resistance because it's the easiest to rationalize. This is so powerful. You got to listen to this. We don't tell ourselves, I'm never going to write my symphony. Instead, we say, I'm going to write my symphony. I'm just going to start tomorrow. I don't know if that impacts you, but it impacts me. So in other words, here's how clever resistance is it's not going to kill your dreams. It's just going to say, put it off till tomorrow. It's not going to kill your desire to improve because it's slicker than that. It's going to say, you don't have to start today. You can start tomorrow. But what happens in our life? Tomorrow never comes. Tomorrow never comes. Tomorrow becomes 5 years, 10 years, 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades, 5 decades. And then at the end of the day, we're saying, my heart is empty because of all this stuff I didn't do. And so procrastination, we can joke about it and I joke about it, but it's often a much deeper reality and a thing to be aware of. Now, he goes on and talks a lot more of the different symptoms and ways that it can show up in our lives. But I want to talk a little bit about the solution that he puts forth to fight resistance, because I'm sure right now maybe you're recognizing some of this in your own life. Maybe you're thinking about and identifying ways that you've seen it play out, but how do we move forward from it? And let's talk about that. So it's the second half of the book is to fight resistance. And here's what he says. He says, you have to move from being an amateur to a professional. Now, that language might sound kind of strange, but just stay with it and let's lay out what he says. He says, the amateur plays for fun. The professional plays for keeps. To the amateur, the game is his avocation. To the pro, it's his vocation. So it's looking at what we do. So one of the way that this struggle played out a lot in his life was Stephen Pressfield wanted to be a writer. And he didn't do it till late in his life because of what he says, this fight of resistance. And so he would make excuses. He had all kinds of side jobs. But then one day he just decided that he was going to start writing. And he was going to write every day. And he was going to treat it as a calling and as his job. And it took a while for him to actually find success. But it was that moment where he said, I stopped playing games and I kind of became a pro. I made this my calling and my livelihood, and eventually it did pay off. He goes on, he says, what's important is the work, the game I have to suit up for. That's the field on which I have to leave everything I've got. Do I really believe that my work is crucial to the planet's survival? Of course not, but it's as important to me as catching that mouse is to the hawk circling outside my window. He's hungry. He needs a kill. So do I. So his point is that every day he's going to try to accomplish something towards what his true north is, what he needs to do. And again, for him, he's using the writing example. So he's got to hit a certain number of pages every day. His day has not been a success no matter what happens till he does that. And it's not optional. If he feels like it, doesn't matter. He's not waiting for inspiration. He's getting up, he's getting behind his computer, and he's getting after it to do that work. He says the artist committing himself to his calling has volunteered for hell. Whether he knows it or not, he will be dining for the duration on a diet of isolation, rejection, self-doubt, despair, ridicule, contempt, and humiliation. The artist must be like that Marine. He has to know how to be miserable. He was also a Marine for some time, so he draws on that experience here. He has to love being miserable. He has to take pride in being more miserable than any soldier or swabby or jet jockey, because this is war, baby. And war is hell. And so again, this is the idea of being comfortable when we're uncomfortable, of learning to love the grind. See, what resistance wants us to already do is to just hope for the quick fix, the easy solution. Give me a pill every day that I can take, and then I'll lose weight and have a six-pack. Well, that's not how it works, right? You go to the gym, you diet, you discipline yourself not to go crazy at holidays when there's all this great food around you. And so the pro understands that, and they're willing to engage in that level of struggle. And they've learned to find a sense of well-being, not in the instant outcome, because good instant outcomes don't exist, but in the struggle of moving forward. So this is kind of the pro mentality that he's getting at. He says, here's how to be a pro, some ways. We show up every day. We might do it only because we have to keep from getting fired, but we do it. We show up every day. And I think these apply spiritually really well too. So I want to show up every day and read the Bible and pray and connect to God, whether I feel like it or not. Because if I wait till I feel like it, those days are few and far between. But when I show up every day and I strive to connect with God, I think that is what really creates spiritual progress. Because if I'm waiting for that spiritual high to come, it's probably not going to come. And I'm going to move backwards, not forwards. Second, he says this: we show up no matter what. In sickness and in health, come hell or high water, we stagger into the factory. We might do it only so not to let down our coworkers, but we do it. We show up no matter what. Third, we stay on the job all day. Our minds may wander, but our bodies remain at the wheel. We pick up the phone when it rings. We don't go home till the whistle blows. 4, we're committed over the long haul. 5, the stakes for us are high and real. We take it serious. 6, we accept remuneration for our labor. 7, we don't over-identify with our jobs. We may take pride in our work. We may stay late and come in on weekends, but we recognize we are not our job descriptions. The amateur, on the other hand, over-identifies. He defines himself by it, and that ends up going to his detriment. We master the techniques of our job. We have a sense of humor, 9, about our jobs. 10, we receive praise or blame in the real world. So those are just kind of interesting. He goes on. He says resistance outwits the amateur with the oldest trick in the book. It uses his own enthusiasm against him. Resistance gets us to plunge into a project with an overambitious and unrealistic timetable for its completion. It knows we can't sustain that level of intensity. We hit the wall, we crash. And how many times have we had fast starts in our life and no finish? Fast starts and we burnt out, we gave up, we threw in the towel. But here's the professional. The professional, on the other hand, understands delayed gratification. He's the ant, not the grasshopper. The tortoise, not the hare. Have you heard the legend of Sylvester Stallone staying up 3 nights straight to churn out Rocky? I don't know. It may even be true, but it's the most pernicious species of myth to set before the awakening writer because it seduces him into believing he can pull off the big score without pain and without persistence. And so I love what he's saying here. What he's saying is, listen, gear up for battle. If you want to do something meaningful, if you want meaningful change in your life, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be overnight. It's not going to be without a fight, but that's okay. That's the struggle we're meant to get into, and the professional understands it and is willing to live in it. They will embrace the grind because they know this is how we eventually win this war against resistance. The sign of the amateur is over-glorification of and preoccupation with the mystery. The professional shuts up. She doesn't talk about it. She does her work. So the amateur gets caught up in all this other stuff, but the professional shows up every day, puts their work in, makes a little bit of progress, and keeps moving forward. The amateur underestimating resistance cunning permits the flu to keep him from his chapters. He believes a serpent's voice in his head that says mailing off that manuscript is more important than doing the day's work. The professional has learned better. He respects resistance. He knows if he caves in today, no matter how plausible the pretext, he'll be twice as likely to cave in tomorrow. Right? We give ourselves a little break here, but then what happens? That break ripples into all these other areas in our life, and we let off the gas, we slow down, we make it too easy, and we don't move forward. The professional knows that resistance is like a telemarketer. If you so much as say hello, you're finished. The pro doesn't even pick up the phone. He stays at work. Now, this reminds me of things that the scriptures say, like in the book of Romans, it says to make no provisions for the flesh. And that's the part of us that is resistant to God, that denies God. And to me, it's the same idea that Stephen Pressfield is saying here, that as soon as we open ourselves up at all to it, it will kick down the door, barge in, and set itself up, to live where we don't want it to live. And so this whole idea is learning to live with this radical discipline where we say, look, this is what my life needs to focus on. No matter if it's hard or easy tomorrow to do it, I'm waking up and I'm doing it. And I'm going to cut myself off from all the things that are going to distract me or pull me away. I think these are powerful concepts and super healthy to think about and to practice in our life. He goes on, the professional cannot allow the actions of others to define his reality. Tomorrow morning, the critic will be gone, but the writer will be there facing the blank page. Nothing matters but that he keep working. Short of a family crisis or the outbreak of World War III, the professional shows up, ready to serve. Remember, resistance wants us to cede sovereignty to others. It wants us to stake our self-worth, our identity, our reason for being on the response of others to our work. Resistance knows we can't take this. No one can. The professional blows critics off. He doesn't even hear them. He reminds himself they're the unwitting mouthpieces of resistance, and as such can be truly cunning and pernicious. They can articulate in their reviews the same toxic venom that resistance itself concocts inside our heads. That is the real evil. And so his point is that the professional isn't living for the praise of people, for the affirmation of people, but they're living true to that internal calling that they have. What I would say is they're living spirit-led. They're living connected to God's vision and purpose for their life. He doesn't put it in Christian terms, but I think that concept is it parallels very well. And the idea is that they're living that out, and they're not getting too caught up in people's praise or people's criticism. Because if you live by people's praise, you'll be crushed by their criticism. We kind of have to be cautious and balanced against both. So there's a lot more in this book, but I wanted to give you a taste. Hopefully some of those thoughts are helpful to you. And we will have more Stephen Pressfield books in future episodes. But thank you for tuning in. And remember, fight resistance today. Don't live life as an amateur, live as a pro.